in Australia. And not only that, the number of children in care has doubled. The rate of children per 1,000 in care has doubled in the last 10 years. And this is occurring at a time when there are decreased numbers of people able to be foster parents. And that occurs for a number of reasons. We know that the average family nowadays needs at least $100,000 income to put a roof over their head. So if you're then asking someone to find the time to care full-time for a child who may have significant problems, you can see the number starts to reduce rapidly.
Which would suggest that a remedy to that would be if they were given adequate funding. Would that,
yes.
Would that help? But further to that, there must be extraordinary emotional stress involvement of foster carers as well. I mean,
absolutely.
High burnout rate.
Yes, there's a high burnout. Is there adequate counselling support for foster carers?
It's patchy. In some states, they've worked very well to try and support foster carers, financially and in other ways, in just this sort of social and emotional support. But it is very tough work. We are talking about young people who are exceedingly damaged and who need a lot of caring and stability to get them into a position where they're able to work on the matters that they need to, their life matters.
And then, as you said earlier, it seems to be effective to a point, to a particular age.
That's right.
So what is the ideal answer for those teenagers, the older teens, that don't seem to respond so well to foster care?
Well, I must admit, in Mr Mulligan's report from South Australia last week, I disagreed with his conclusion that there should be secure care. He basically argued that for some young people, in order to protect themselves, they should be locked up. Personally speaking, I'm not convinced that that's the right way to go. I think in the past we've tried that sort of situation, mostly with young women, and quite often with young women who were sexually abused, whose behaviour was misinterpreted as bad behaviour and uncontrollable behaviour, rather than looking at it as a consequence of abuse. That said, I mean, he correctly highlights that we're not talking about angels here. We're talking about people who have very, very difficult and challenging behaviour. And we need a range of residential care options. And some of those should need to be quite intensive. Others need to be less intensive. And the difficulty for the systems at the moment is all the money, not all the money, but most of the money goes to investigation. And there is very little left to provide the sorts of intensive services that these young people need.
And given the fact that with the social workers involved, there's something like, I think, a 40% burnout rate for them along the way. We've got to address the issue of these caseworkers who are being overloaded and, frankly, who are getting such a bad rap in the media because of all of these string of incidents, particularly in New South Wales.
It's not hard to see why the turnover rate is so high. Very stressful work, often little organisational support. The organisations themselves are risk averse, which means that practice over the time has become far more proceduralised and driven by policy directives. And people are worried that if they make the wrong mistake, they'll end up on the front page of the paper. And I've talked to many staff about this. I've worked in those systems for over a decade myself. Frankly, many people reach the conclusion that they'd rather find a job elsewhere.
Well, and also the kids don't have that continuity of care either. I mean, they're being swapped and passed around through caseworkers who don't know the background.
You're right, and it's not just the rapid turnover of staff where young people in care will then, perhaps see 5 or 6 different caseworkers in a year. And in the sense the roles are reversed, the child actually has to teach the caseworker about their situation. We also know that from Australian studies that children on average go through 2.5 placements per year. So if you're thinking about a child who's been in care for 10 years, we're looking at least 20 to 25 placements. Yeah. Now you think about how you or I might
so unsettling for them.
Well, it compounds the problems. And that's why I'm saying we need a radical overhaul of the way we approach this. There's no doubt that governments have been prepared to put in big money over the last decade. Now the Australian child protection systems take over $3 billion of taxpayer money per year, and yet we know the life outcomes for children in care are abysmal. They have high rates of unemployment, poor education, high rates of mental illness, high rates of drug and alcohol abuse. they tend to end up, not always, but they quite often tend to end up in prison and with their own fractured families and relationships, and then the cycle repeats.
It just further exacerbates the system.
Clearly the system's not working.
Look, it's an extraordinary story. It's, as I said at the start of this chat, I can't believe it happens in Australia, but it does happen in Australia. Let's hope we can find a solution. Thank you so much for your time.
And good luck at the 2020 summit this weekend. Hopefully you can make your voice heard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.